Earth, circa 2050. Food shortages and water problems lead to large-scale riots across the planet. With so few resources left to mine within the planet, governments begin to look at Mars, the closest source of iron, copper and other minerals vital to industry on Earth. Enter the Ultor Corporation. The massive multi-billion-dollar company saw the vast potential of Martian resources, and required the raw materials abundant on Mars in order to continue growing. Through means both fair and foul, Ultor's board convinced the United Nations to confer upon the corporation a 99-year lease on all Martian territorial and mining rights. Using early navigation routes and mineral scans, previously mapped out by Earth's government science teams, the hard work had already been done. By the end of 2050, Ultor had established its first colony of scientists and support staff on Mars. 1 year later, the first mine was opened. Mars was blessed with tremendous mineral wealth, more so than all early reports had predicted, but the planet lacked energy resources to help maintain that wealth. Dust storms were regular, disruptive occurrence, boosting maintenance fees to astronomical levels. Ultor controlled what costs it could. Atmosphere scrubbers were scrapped in the dead of night, while cheap workshops were established in the mines to produce as much of the necessary infrastructure to survive as possible. But through all the hardships of the early years, compared to life on Earth, Mars was a paradise. There were no wars, no ethnic cleansings, and no food shortages. Ultor controlled life on the planet with a methodical sense of purpose. Since everyone expected the early years would be difficult, unrest among the workers was maintained at a minimum level. That is, until Dr. Axel Kapek arrived at the Martian colony. Kapek was a scientist who was once at the forefront of nanotechnology research. He had run afoul of the law when his innocent experiments were revealed to have breached human rights and international law. These revelations would have been the end of his career had Ultor not offered him a way out of the criminal sentence he faced. The corporation realized that in order for their operations to become a truly profitable enterprise, even further cutbacks were required. They needed a miner who wouldn't complain, or better yet, a miner that couldn't complain at all. Mars, circa 2067. The Ultor Corporation begins the Martian Advanced Science Team expedition, exploring deep into the depths of the planet. This resulted in the accidental discovery of a hibernating alien species close to the planet's core. The entire science team was slaughtered after the creatures awoken. Kapek was the sole survivor of the expedition and ordered the shaft leading to the caverns to be sealed, disabling the aliens from reaching the surface. Kapek then used the expedition's findings to create his own manipulated version of the alien species. The Ultor Plague was born. Kapek soon began spreading his newly created virus across the Martian colony, infecting hundreds within the first few months. Those affected were reduced to husks of human beings in short form. Kapek continued his research, kidnapping miners from their barracks in the dead of night, and transferring them to his secret science lab beneath the mining complex. One such miner was the wife of an employee of Kapek. Ravaged by tumors, her husband and daughter could only watch as she succumbed to the plague, in the first wave of casualties. The young girl, who later became known as Eos, was so traumatized by her mother's death, that when she discovered who was responsible for the disease, she vowed revenge on Ultor and Kapek. 2 years later, Eos would initiate the creation of the Red Faction. The end of Ultor had begun. Mars, circa 2075. Eos begins actively recruiting from the dissident miners that she knew rankled under Ultor's oppressive system. Slowly, the Red Faction grew, and as it grew, so did its influence. Aware of the bad publicity that this dissension could generate, Ultor chose to obliterate the opposition, rather than work with it to address their legitimate grievances. They eradicated the first demonstrations, leading to mass arrests and more than a few executions. More miners were brought in to replace the insurgents and conditions degenerated further. Eos managed to escape the raids, but the corporate clampdown had turned her from an aggrieved dissident to a raging radical. No longer would she be content with civil disobedience. Engaging an Ultor employee named Hendrix to relay her information, the surviving members of the Red Faction began increasing their militaristic operations. These growing acts of terrorism culminated when Eos set a bomb off in a cafeteria near the miner barracks. Only a handful of guards were injured, but the explosion was seen as a call to arms. The rebellion had begun. Unknown to Eos, the tipping point in the Red Faction's favor arrived that very day. Having fled his boring, coddled life on Earth to find adventure on Mars, a man named Parker heeded Ultor's promise of steady work and a chance to get away from the horrors of Earth. Parker knew next to nothing about the subjugation of the planet. He simply wanted to get away from his parents and the life they had predetermined for him. On that day, however, Parker witnessed the horrors of Ultor's occupation. He quickly saw rampant brutality, the scourge of the plague, and astonishingly unsafe working conditions. As Ultor cracked down on the Red faction, Parker witnessed the brutal murder of an innocent miner by an Ultor guard. When Parker stepped in to help, it led to a mass riot. Thrust now into a leading role for the liberation of Mars, Parker had become enemy number 1 on Ultor's list. He had no idea how this would play out, but Parker had inspired the residents of Mars to overthrow their oppressors in a wave of violence. Guided by Hendricks, who betrayed his employer upon seeing Parker's actions, Parker attracted the attention of EOS, kidnapped an Ultor VIP named Griffin, and tried to unlock the secrets of Ultor's stranglehold on Mars. What Parker and EOS learned shocked them: hideous experiments with nanotechnology and the true source of the plague. If the Red faction hoped to overthrow Ultor, they would need to infiltrate the deepest sectors of the corporation's hidden laboratories, and find Axel Capek. The journey was hard fought, but in the end, Parker and EOS found Capek tending to his experiments in his secret lab. Capek refused to surrender, but EOS managed to secure details of the antidote for the plague and proof of Ultor's crimes. The two left Capek for dead and then split up. EOS headed to the surface to try and develop a cure for the plague from Capek's notes, while Parker contacted the Earth Defense Force. This was no simple task, however. Though the EDF rushed to the scene to deal with Ultor's crimes, Parker had to journey into space on board a shuttle in order to shut down Ultor's laser defense system. Growing desperate, Ultor employees began destroying documents and computer files, trying to bury their wrongdoings, before the EDF fleet could arrive. Parker managed to destroy the space station, and cleared the way for the EDF, as he crash-landed back onto the Martian surface in an escape pod. Ultor's last gasp was to use a regiment of mercenaries they had in reserve, led by the infamous Colonel Masako, to cleanse Mars of any evidence of Ultor's crimes. But, it was too little too late. Parker managed to kill Masako, deactivate the bomb she had set, and save EOS, just as the EDF swooped down and restored order to the Martian colony. EOS vowed to leave Mars behind her and suggested to Parker that he should find a new job. The citizens of Mars hoped their troubles were over, but the experiments of Ultor's scientists could not simply fade away and be forgotten. Even though Mars had been liberated, the shadows of Ultor would remain for decades to come.